Article 3, Mr. DiPaolo.
I move the printed motion under Article 3.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 3 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to transfer the sum of $1,940,000 from free cash to 3 accounts for improvements to the water system as described in the manager's October 7th memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mrs. Vedder.
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 3.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 3, Mr. Mizikar?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'll provide a brief overview of the financials related to the article, and I'll have DPW Director Howland provide an overview of what we're looking to accomplish. First and foremost, as was stated, this transfers $1,940,000 from free cash that was generated in relation to the water system that operated for fiscal year 19. We established an enterprise fund effective July 1st for this new fiscal year 2020, so this will be the last year that we need to come back to town meeting to be disciplined and transfer these funds out. These funds are generated in 2 main ways in flow to free cash. One is excess water revenues that come in over our estimates, and that was a little over $1.3 million, and that number is larger than prior years. Town meeting members may remember in May of 2018, after that town meeting, the water rate was changed, and however, we did not increase our estimates for the revenue for that fiscal year 19. And we didn't do that because oftentimes when you increase a water rate, users' use habits change, and we wanted to be conservative in that approach. And further, this gives us the opportunity to be able to make one rate increase and spread that amount over at least 5 fiscal years. So this was part of the plan, although the revenues were slightly higher because total consumption of water did not change as we anticipated that it might. So first and foremost, we'll move $250,000 into the new stabilization account that was just created in the prior article. The goal for stabilization for each of our utilities going forward will be to have approximately 5% of the annual operating budget in the stabilization account, and $250,000 represents 3.8% of the FY20 operating budget. So we'll continue to work on that over the years to come. The second bucket of funding is $825,000 will be moved to the water system improvement accounts. And this is the historic or most common transfer that happens with these funds that flow into free cash. It's primarily used to ensure funds derived from water rates remain with the utility and would be used for future appropriations. There's currently $200,000 in the water system improvement accounts, and should this article pass, there'd be $1,025,000 in the water system improvement account. Finally, which I'll have Director Howland come up and discuss how the $865,000 for water quality improvement initiatives would move us forward.
Mr. Howland.
Mr. Moderator, town meeting members. First, this is Dan Rowley, new Water and Sewer Superintendent. Started 5 weeks ago today. So he's a little, so bear with him. As many of you know, we have water quality concerns in our existing system. The water treatment plant went online roughly 1 year ago in October of 2018. The biggest issue that we see today is dirty water. The manganese that's leaving the plant is non-detect. We have no water leaving the treatment plant currently that has manganese in the water. The manganese that we see currently is from the residual that's been left on the pipes and was in the system from years of not flushing. So this appropriation for the $865,000, we have 4 different projects that we would like to consider moving forward. The first is unidirectional flushing, which is a different method of flushing than we have done in the past. It's actually, we close valves and use the flow rate to increase flow that scours out the pipes better than just flushing that we do currently, which is we open a hydrant and we actually just move the water around, and we clean that general area, but we've moved it down the line. With unidirectional flushing, which is much more comprehensive, we have used a plan that was developed by our consultant, where there's a 12 sections of town that we will do, and we'll finish one section, move on to the next. So the first round will be in an area which we have seen the most dirty water complaints, which is in our high water district, or basically the center of town north. We have a contract that is being bid this Thursday, and hopefully we will start 1st of November, and we'll go until the weather turns cold. And then we'll pick it up again in the spring. So we have 12 zones, 4 are in the high. That's zones 5, 6, 7, and 8. Depending if the bids come in good, we will also do zones 1 and 2, which is in the low pressure area by the treatment plant down to Route 9, including North Quincy. We plan on doing this on a yearly basis. We would like to do the rest of the town, the 2/3 of the town, next year, starting sometime in the spring, going all summer long. The directional flushing is a lot more labor intensive. We have not unidirectionally flushed probably in 30, 40 years. This also requires us to exercise valves. We're estimating that 20% of our valves need to be either replaced or at least exercised, which sort of adds to this issue that we're having. As I said, the bids are due Thursday, and we hope to start the unidirectional flushing early November. Many of you have seen that recently we have found Pfas in our water. Pfas is an emerging contaminant. It's a per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. There's a family of thousands and thousands of chemicals in that. They're man-made. We originally tested for Pfas, which is, there's 5 chemicals that count toward our number. We tested it under the UCMR 3 in 2015. The reporting limit back then was 20 parts per trillion. We were non-detect at that time. However, in 2019, the summer of 2019, DEP had requested that water systems in Massachusetts voluntarily test for PFAS at a much lower detection limit. If you've seen the paper, I think there was an article in the Telegram Gazette several months ago, probably in July or August, that PFAS was found in the water systems in Air, Devens, Harvard, Littleton, Bourne, Westfield, most of them associated with military establishments. However, when we tested in July and then confirmed in August, we tested positive for PFAS. The limit is very low. It's below the 70, that's the EPA standard, 20, which is the state's projected standard, which they probably will promulgate sometime in January of 2020. The average of the 2 tests of our finished water is 13.65. We felt, however, after consultation with DEP, we felt that we should let the residents of Shrewsbury know that we did detect water or PFAS in our wells. They tested positive in all 7 of our current wells, ranging from 3.1 up to 21. Part of this funding will be to conduct a pilot study for PFAS. There's several different methods that we will look at. There's granulated activated carbon, and then there's ion exchange. It all depending on the type of PFAS that we have. Long chain works well with granulated activated carbon. The short chain is treated more with the ion exchange. So depending on which one we actually find and which one we're more gets us best results is what we'll look at either way. The third is the hexavalent chromium. We pilot tested hexavalent chromium while the treatment plant was being constructed. Unfortunately, while doing those testing, the hexavalent chromium in the wells that we were using went to 0. We could not pilot test anymore. So therefore, we had to abandon the original tests. So we are now in the process of reapproving a hexavalent chromium pilot testing using one of our existing wells, and then supplementing that with additional hexavalent chromium to get to a level that we can pilot. We will look at 2 options, biological treatment, similar to our manganese treatment, and then we'll also do ion exchange to see if that works. We're not optimistic about the ion exchange, as there's a lot of waste associated with that, which then requires sending that out for treatment later. We plan on starting the pilot, once we receive approval from DEP, start piloting the hexavalent chromium in the spring after the freeze. The technology requires us to basically either build a building or have the testing equipment outside, which then, if we have it outside, we'll have to either put heaters in, so it makes more sense to do it in April once the freezing is, the threat of freezing is over. That pilot testing lasts 14 weeks, requires us to sample 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times a week, and send the lab results to Indiana, as there's only 2 labs in the country that can test for hexavalent chromium. The fourth thing would be to do, as issues come up, whether it's regular flushing or any other water quality improvement that we can do during the year after these 3 will also be included as part of this. Going back to the PFAS, Worcester DPW tested Bell Pond. If anybody knows what Bell Pond is, right off of Belmont Street in Worcester, right just below Worcester Votech or Green Hill Park. That has no inlet into that pond, so there's no water that comes in from the road, doesn't come in from the school, doesn't come in from the apartments behind it. It is a spring-fed pond. That tested 9.6 in PFAS. This is going to be an emergent contaminant that is nationwide. Basically, if you have not tested for PFAS, if you don't have PFAS, you probably haven't tested for it. Basically, I'll open that up for questions or through the moderator.
Questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir. Mr. Moss.
Brian Moss, 16 Ruthven Circle, Precinct 8. Just a question on the timeline. I was trying to listen in on when you said you first tested and when you found it. Can you describe again, like, when we think that those substances entered the water, or if that 2015 test would have detected something and it wasn't there? Can you just describe that timeline again?
Mr. Howland?
Mr. Moderator, we're not sure where the PFAS came from, when the PFAS was there. It was not detected in 2015, but the reporting limit was 20. That was as low as the labs could test. It was found in July of this year and then confirmed again in August.
Follow-up question?
Go ahead, Mr. Moss.
What in PFAS, can you describe what the F stands for in PFAS?
Go ahead, Mr.
Pre
Howland.
and poly?
No, the F, not the P.
Oh. Fluoro.
Fluoro, do you know what substance that is, or?
It's a fluoride of some sort.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Yes, sir. Mr. Garabedian. Is that Mr. Garabedian?
I'm interested to see if there's any
sorry.
type of reaction from the federal government, and if there's any type of support from the federal government, either from an intellectual standpoint or a financial standpoint, because it seems to be a very major emerging problem for all of us.
Mr. Howland?
Currently, the EPA is evaluating it and putting a recommend a standard of 70 parts per trillion. Massachusetts and several of the other states are going beyond that, and Massachusetts is looking at lowering it to 20. It is an emergent contaminant. There's a lot of studies still need to be done.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? Okay, there being none, and this, oh, sorry, in the back there. Having trouble seeing you.
Thanks. Catherine Rajwani, Precinct 7. With regard to the PFAS contamination, there have been some studies that have come out recently where PFAS was found in artificial turf. Have we been testing any of the runoff from the artificial turf fields?
Mr. Howland?
We have not, but I can say that the artificial turf does not drain or discharge towards our wells. They're in the opposite direction.
Where do they, because my understanding is that the high school field is in the Aquifer Overlay District, which feeds the aquifers.
Go ahead, Mr. Howland.
The high school is in technically a zone 3. The aquifer that these wells are in are a zone 2, and there is a hydrogeologic difference between the two. The water from the high school does not go into our zone 2.
So where does it drain to?
Go ahead, Mr.
It
Howland.
drains to the south, and the wells are to the northwest.
Okay, so there, and with the St. John's, is that runoff tested? The St. John's field?
No, but that goes to the West River, which goes to the Lake Quincy directly. Does not go towards our wells.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3, Ms. Steering?
Martha Deering, Precinct 4. With this transfer from free cash, how much does that leave us in free cash?
Response, Mr. Mizikar? How much free cash would remain after this transfer?
So initial certification of free cash was $8,631,980. We're moving $1,940,000 out. I can do the math. Someone can beat me to it. Yep, a little less than 6.7 million.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? Yes, sir.
Kevin Flaherty, Precinct 5. Just curious, what is the long-term plan for our water system? It seems like every year or a few years, there's another thing or product that we find in the system. And I'm all for detection and the best drinking water we can get, but I'm just curious, what is our plan over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years in regard to how we will continue to manage this when things keep changing all the time? And what is the monetary side of that once we determine what the issues are?
Mr. Howland? Oh, Mr. Mizikar and then Mr. Howland.
So briefly looking backwards to 2014, 2015, the town undertook a comprehensive source study of all the different options that we may have for drinking water sources, and that included a well-based system that we have in place now, potentially tying into some surface water sources with the MWRA and surrounding communities. And it was ultimately decided upon through support of a 2016 report that we would continue to use the gravel-packed wells in the locations that we have them, because they produce the volume of water that we need to be able to service the community. On a daily basis, we're pumping 7 million gallons of water out of the ground and distributing to the customers. And after that decision was made, we then moved forward with the development and the construction of our new water treatment plant. But I do hear your concerns because, you know, we share those same worries about what's next. As science gets better, and as we went from 2016 to 2019 in testing, you know, we went from 20 parts per trillion being the lowest we could sample now down to some labs less than 2 parts per trillion. So when you get better at testing things, you're going to find more things. So as we put these funds in place and look forward to the solutions for our water, we're going to try to be as robust as we can whenever we're implementing solutions to cast the largest net, but knowing that we have to move as expeditiously forward and get these specific contaminants out of water. So we'll be doing things like, when should we be filtering and out the PFAS? Should it be at the individual wells? Should it be at the finished water? At what stage in our process? Is it before the manganese is taken out, after the manganese is taken out? So we're going to look at all of that to try to, again, cast the largest net and give us as many options for the future. I'd love to say that this will be the last time we come back or identify a contaminant, but we just don't know. The town does participate, since we have over 10,000 customers, in these regular unregulated contaminants, you know, every few years, which means we're searching for things that we currently hadn't been previously testing for. So we're going to try to be as broad as we can with our filtration and treatment processes, but we just don't know what's around the corner.
Further questions or comments? Yes, sir.
James Daly, Precinct 2. So since 2014, an estimate, how much money have we spent on our water system? Seems to be an exorbitant amount of money, or a large sum of money. Just trying to figure that out.
Mr. Mizikar?
I don't have a specific number for you. I can tell you on an annual basis, we spend about $6 million in operations. You know, over the past few years, we've been replacing mains at about $2 million per year. We have some other ongoing meter replacement programs, et cetera. So, you know, I would say on average every year we're spending about $7 to $8 million, and then we constructed the new treatment plant. This isn't a, you know, while manganese may have a disproportionate impact on the Shrewsbury drinking water system, there's something that has a disproportionate effect on everyone's drinking water system. You know, the city of Worcester, MWRA, they're all going to struggle with PFAS. They're all going to struggle with different things. Source water has different contaminants and byproducts that occur when you treat it versus groundwater. So there's no single perfect solution, and man-made chemicals have certainly complicated it. So we certainly are going to treat for everything that we know and can, and do the best to stay ahead of the curve.
Further questions or comments? Ms. Hollenbach?
Lisa Hollenbach, Precinct 9. Kind of a follow-up to their questions. Water has been called the new gold for probably the last 20 years. I mean, not only Shrewsbury is having problems all over the United States, but as climate change is getting worse, we're seeing a lot more changes coming down, a lot of changes within the whole environment. Does Shrewsbury have any plans to possibly look into a sustainability committee in which water would be part of that, not only, you know, as far as, you know, drinking water, but as well as preserving water, that kind of thing?
Response, Mr. Mizikar?
I mean, there's no specific plans to do that right now, but I mean, it's something that certainly could be considered.
Further questions or comments, Mrs. Goldman?
Roberta Goldman, Precinct 8. I'm sure you've answered this question many times about the stabilization funds. I would just like to know, because our town is growing, we have lots of needs, and I support this measure. What have been some of the major sources that we get for funding our stabilization funds, and is that a problem, or do we have to do something more with it.
Response, Mr. Mizikar.
So the primary source of funding that we use to build up our stabilization accounts is free cash. And free cash, has two primary sources, revenues that exceed our estimates and funds that are appropriated but turned back because we find more efficient or greater value or just lower cost estimates that come in through the actual bid process. So $8.6 million is the highest free cash has ever been for the community, so it remains strong and stable. I'll point to the town's recent upgrade of 2 rating levels with Standard & Poor's as a testament to the strength of the financial condition. We have the highest bond rating that you can get, which is a AAA. And I think the steps that the Board of Selectmen took last November in putting more emphasis on how much money is in stabilization versus how much is generated in free cash provides for that long-term stability in our rainy day funds and our long-term reserves that will keep the community stable. So free cash may fluctuate year to year, but the goal is to have a solid base within stabilization that is only touched if approved by this body.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 3? There being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 3 please signify by saying aye? Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes